This content is brought to you by Fisher Improvement Technologies Online, a learning platform that includes self-paced courses, knowledge sharing, and networking opportunities for safety, quality, and performance improvement professionals. Join now for free at online.improvewithfit.com. What's up, everyone? Welcome to the next episode of the Hop In podcast. We are your hosts, Justin and
Ray.
That's right. We have a pretty special guest today for you. We got Mr. Rob Fisher, who decided to join us from his office. He's the president and director of operations for Fisher Improvement Technologies. I'm sure a lot of you know him already. And our topic for the day is going to be on System 1 versus System 2 thinking, and how that relates to the performance modes, specifically skill-based performance modes. Ray, why don't you go ahead and get us kicked off with the question that we had from Elliot Wolf last week?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. And Rob, thank you for being here. The question came from Elliot. You know, he was asking, can I be in System 1 thinking and not be in skill-based performance mode? Because throughout the performance modes presentation in our Aero Fundamentals workshop online, there's a statement that's made that all skill-based performance mode is System 1 thinking, but not all System 1 thinking is skill-based performance mode. So that prompted a question from Elliot to ask us, hey, can you be in rule-based performance mode and have System 1 thinking? And it's great that Rob is with us today because he's about to write a book on performance modes and how they relate with System 1 and System 2 thinking. And so, Rob, do you want to expand on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I hope Lewis Sr. never hears that I'm about to write a book. That would be devastating.
Yeah, right.
He was about to write a book. Thank you for having me. You know, that's a great question because as skill-based, rule-based, and knowledge-based general layer modeling systems have been around for decades. But Kahneman's System 1 and System 2, thinking fast and slow, hasn't been around for that long. It's a new, more advanced way of looking at how our brain works. So when we really started diving into those two things, we started realizing that there are some things that you do in skill-based performance mode, like drive home to work, work to home, home to work, work to home, home to work, work to home. You can get there in skill-based performance mode, and you probably are also in System 1 thinking, where you're using the fast part of your brain. But let's say you have to drive to the airport. Now, you're in rule-based performance mode because you haven't done it greater than 50 times. It's more than 7 steps. It's not a habit, but you probably don't have to engage your brain very much to do that. In other words, you could still be in System 1 thinking. You look to your right, you look for somebody in the mirror, you look in your rearview mirror, you look to the left, you change lanes. All of those are done in general in System 1 with your System 1 brain. But they're not skill-based in that it doesn't meet the science-based criteria for skill-based performance mode, less than 7 steps, greater than 50 times over a short period of time. Remember, rule-based performance mode, the error rate in rule-based performance mode of 1 in 100 is for things that you can do from memory, so they're less than 7 steps long, that you know a rule exists for. So your brain can go to System 1 as it wants to do. Remember, System 1 is the least energy, and your brain likes to go there. So your brain can go to System 1 on those things. It could be something as simple as turning off the lights in a building when you start to leave it. Technically, you haven't done it 50 to 100 times, and it may be less than 7 steps long, so you could do it from memory, but you just naturally do it. You don't engage that System 2 brain, and you walk around and you flip off lights, and in your brain, you're absolutely sure you turned off all those lights, but you didn't because you skipped steps. So I would challenge that a lot of skipped steps in rule-based performance mode would probably happen in system one. We don't have any science to back that up, but that's just the way I perceive how those two would fit together. And I'll open it up for discussion with you guys as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, because when you were talking about the driving to the airport thing, I think, how many times, and I've caught myself doing it. I look in the mirror, I don't see anything, do the little air quotes, and proceed to move over, and then there's somebody there. So in system one, so my brain didn't make the connection or didn't shift to cognitive thinking, which we need system two for, but I just always think that there's not a car there, so I move over. I've had that happen several times where I've looked, didn't really see anything, but there was actually something there.
Well, and Justin, you have a lot of weapons, and each weapon is a little bit different, and they all have their own sets of rules. But you could actually move to system one thinking if you just let your brain do what it wants to do. You could move to system one thinking pretty easily with your weapons, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the most important reasons why you have to stay conscious of what you're doing when you're working on a task that has serious injury or fatality potential. You have to be aware of what's going on at all times and keep your brain in system two.
Or if it's not there, move it there. And the only way to move it is through the use of a tool, right?
Right.
That's another thing that a lot of people get confused about, is that our brain shifts back and forth automatically between system one and system two.
Right.
What really happens is your brain shifts automatically from system two to system one. It shoves something over to that fast brain, low energy state.
Right.
But once it's there, it has no desire to go back unless you force it back.
Yeah, I've always equated that to, that's where the recognition comes in. You have to recognize that that's happening, and then you have to use conscious thought to move that system one back to system two.
Ray, why don't you bring up the slide that we've got that describes skill-based performance mode?
Yeah, we can absolutely do that. Rob mentioned it. So for everyone out there, when we talk about skill-based performance mode, those are those things, skill-based performance mode. And of course, there it goes. Skill-based performance mode. Again, things we do out of habit. We don't need conscious thought. You don't have to think about it. And like Rob said, and what the science says is we've got to do it a lot of times. The only way to skill-based performance mode is through repetition. And it has to be short, less than 7 steps. And if you remember those error rates, it's 1 in 1,000. And when we're talking about things that we don't have a lot of thought around, that 1 in 1,000, it's pretty good. You want to add anything, Justin?
Yeah. So it's actually, especially in the workplace, it's extremely hard to get there. So that's something to remember. And if it doesn't match the science-based definition of skill-based performance mode, you're not there. You can be in system one, but it's very hard to get to skill-based performance mode.
Yeah, and a lot of people
because of the iterations, right?
Because of the iterations and because of the complexity of different tasks.
Yeah.
When we're talking about performance mode, it's this person on this task at this time. Tiny changes in the system, whether, you could have a change in the work environment and all of a sudden the way you would have to do that task may change.
Well, that brings up a good point that I think goes even beyond Elliot's question, and that is, I may have a change in the task that drives me out of skill-based performance mode. In other words, I can't be there anymore because I haven't done this task. And that's the key to skill based is this task.
Right.
Greater than 50 to 100 times anymore because I've had some upset condition. That doesn't mean my brain wants to just jump right out of system 1 and into system 2. So again,
Right.
A little extension of Elliot's question is I can be cruising along in skill-based performance mode, putting the nut on the bolt, putting the nut on the bolt, putting the nut on the bolt, putting the nut on the bolt. And then all of a sudden have an upset condition, and I just keep trying to put the nut on the bolt because that's what my brain wants to do.
Yeah, the brain thinks that's still the task, hasn't recognized that the task actually changed.
Right. And that's why triggers become important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because I really don't need a trigger. When I'm in skill-based performance mode, put the nut on the bolt, put the nut on the bolt, put the nut on the bolt. I don't need any triggers. I've got a good error rate. If it's a critical task, I should be verbalizing when I'm doing it. But if it's not a critical task, then I'm probably not going to do that. And then it's difficult sometimes to see those upset conditions because your system 1 brain has kicked in and it's not looking for them.
Right. Elliot also mentioned in our back and forth after last week's episode talking about this, he mentioned the book The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman, and he mentions Norman doors, where you pull instead of push or push instead of pull, and how that confuses a lot of people. And people are like, well, why do we have to have signs on a door telling us which way to move the door? Well, because you don't know. If it has a handle on both sides, it could be either or. So they put the sign on there to move people from system 1 to system 2, give them that rule to follow. Whether they follow it or not, that's a whole different thing. And he started equating it to also the stoplight. The green arrow turns green and the light for the straight lane stays red, but you lift your foot off the brake and then catch yourself because your brain sees the green and starts to go. And he said his 10-year-old started yelling out, "Oh, look, it's a Norman light now." So it was a pretty good conversation back and forth of having that system 1, system 2 thinking versus skill-based and rule-based performance mode, because he did want to know, can we be in system 1 thinking and rule-based performance mode? And I think we've talked about that quite a bit here today, that you can be in rule-based performance mode and still use system 1 thinking, but you still have to force yourself out of system 1 thinking to put that conscious thought into your actions.
If you're using the right tool the right way in the right performance mode, that should keep you from slipping into system 1 thinking. So if you are in rule-based performance mode, you're doing this task step by step, following a rule, and using verbalized point and touch, it makes it more difficult for your brain to slip there.
Or to stay there.
Or stay there because you're staying conscious of what you're doing.
Well, and I would also challenge that a lot of people don't think about this, but if I slip into knowledge-based performance mode, that doesn't necessarily mean my brain comes out of system 1. So if I was doing something in system 1 thinking, but I move into the characteristics of knowledge-based performance mode where I don't know what I don't know, but I don't recognize it because I'm in system 1. In other words, I don't see the trigger. I can be in system 1 and in knowledge-based performance mode.
Good point, Ron.
Yeah.
So this is a great question that a lot of people out there are equating system 1 and skill-based. They're the same thing. But I love what you said. That is, all skill-based is system 1 because it's done out of habit, not thinking, low or no conscious thought. Some of the definitions for system 1, but not all system 1 thinking is skill-based performance mode. And that's the real separation and segregation between these two sets of science-based concepts: the neurological concept of system 1, system 2, fast brain, slow brain, and the physical concepts of the general error modeling system of skill-based, rule-based, and knowledge-based.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing that this topic is reminding me of is the concept of habit intrusion, and how that will impact someone in moving from system 2 to system 1. Rob, would you mind going into that a little bit and explaining what habit intrusion is?
Yeah, so habit intrusion, by its very nature, would be the description of system 1. The habit then continues, even though the condition under which you're doing that may have changed. So habit intrusion says we're going to do something the way we've always done it, because our brain is geared to do it that way. Well, really, the way Kahneman describes system 1 is habit intrusion is one of the traps for system 1. So again, if you're doing something like verbalize, point and touch, or you're following things step by step in verbalizing, that makes it almost impossible for habit intrusion to kick in. Not impossible, but almost impossible, because your brain is now focused on the path and the steps and the needed actions, and it can only be focused on that. A lot of times habit intrusion kicks in when your focus is on something else, but you just keep doing what you normally do. So habit intrusion would be, I had habit intrusion yesterday. I was thinking about a whole bunch of other things, and I was driving home, and I was supposed to go to the farm, but instead of driving to the farm where I don't normally go from work, I turned left and started towards the house. That would be habit intrusion. Had I gotten to the point where I needed to take that V and just mentioned to myself that I was going to the farm, that slips it into system 2 from system 1 and reduces the probability that habit intrusion sends you towards the wrong house. Now, realize that has no catastrophic bearing, but we have to understand that that's still the mental framework. It's the identical human failure mechanism that is seen when someone is doing a critical task.
Right, for sure. And I mean, the story that you just told is a great example of being in system 1 thinking and not in skill-based performance mode.
Absolutely. And even more so because we haven't gone 50 days driving back and forth from my house to this office and that work to home, home to work, work to home, home to work. We haven't done that 50 times in a row yet, because we were quarantined somewhere else for COVID. We just started coming back into the office from that house. So that again, I mean, I hate to stretch this out, but that again comes into play, because a lot of times with habit intrusion, we can go back into old habits and we make these mistakes, even though we haven't moved into skill-based performance mode on it again, because we had some kind of condition that pulled us out of skill-based. And for us, the COVID and quarantine was a prime example, because we moved out to another house and quarantined out there. And we've only been back here for a few weeks. So we haven't had time to get into skill-based performance mode. We haven't had the iterations. This is why people, when they move, drive to the wrong house, drive to their old house. That's habit intrusion.
Yeah, it brings up another example that got to see firsthand working with an auto manufacturer. And so in an auto manufacturing plant, people can get to skill-based performance mode rather quickly within 2 days of being on that task. And then they have these exceptions that are coming through. They call stragglers. So one of the things that we adjusted for them is they're like, so we need to talk to ourselves every time we're doing this. We said, no, but do the verbalization piece on the stragglers, because that's where the habit intrusion starts to come in, because they were forgetting the last 2 steps of putting in 2 clips. after they put in the 5 bolts for the exhaust system. And the stragglers required 2 clips. So they would do the first 4 or 5 correctly, but there's 35 more coming behind it. They reverted back to the habit of just putting in the bolts because they're looking at the same undercarriage of a car all day, every day, not recognizing that they shifted back into their habit or their skill-based task of putting in the 5 bolts, not recognizing the change in the task and having to add those clips. So not a fatality potential, but a huge quality upset because they've got to pull those cars back out of line and then fix them. So it takes extra time to do so.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this has been a really good conversation to have.
Absolutely.
I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up for the day. Rob, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
You bet. I love this. I mean, I love being able to have a conversation like this because I think what you guys are doing is you're generating a lot of thoughts that people may have, but nobody sits around and talks them through enough. In the classroom, we don't get a chance to do that. So I love what you guys are doing with podcasts.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
All right, everyone. We'll see you right here next week. Until then, keep improving.